we did a military exercise in Texas, and a whole bunch of folks were sure that this was the start of martial law, and were suggesting maybe don't cooperate with the United States Army in an effort to prepare so that if they get deployed overseas, they can handle it. But that's how difficult sometimes these debates are. But I want to pick up on some things where I think there should be consensus. One of those areas that I talked about at the speech, part of the proposal, is developing smart gun technology. Now, this is an interesting example. I don't exactly understand this, and maybe there will be somebody in the audience who explains it to me. Back in 1997, the CEO of Colt said, we can design or are starting to develop guns where you can only use it if you've got a chip. So you wear a band or a bracelet, and that then protects your 2-year-old or 3-year-old from picking up the gun and using it. And a boycott was called against them, and they had to back off of developing that technology. The same with Smith & Wesson. They were in the process of developing similar technology, and they were attacked by the NRA as surrendering. Now, to me, this does not make sense. If you are a gun owner, I would think that you would at least want a choice so that if you wanted to purchase a firearm that could only be used by you, in part to avoid accidents in your home, in part to make sure that if it's stolen, it's not used by a criminal, in part if there's an intruder, you pull the gun, but somehow it gets wrested away from you, that gun can't be turned on you and used on you. I would think there might be a market for that. You could sell that gun. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily would be the only gun that's available, but it seems to me that that would be something that in any other area, in any other product, any other commercial venture, there'd be some research and development on that because that's a promising technology. It has not been developed primarily because it's been blocked by either the NRA, which are funded by gun manufacturers, or other reasons. In part, what we proposed was, you know what, we're going to do some of the research. We'll work with the private sector. We'll figure out whether or not this technology can be developed, and then give everybody a choice in terms of the kind of firearm that they want to purchase, because I think that there will, in fact, be a market for that, and over time, that's an example of how we could reduce some of the preventable gun deaths that are out there.
I want to bring in somebody who actually knows a lot about selling guns. Why don't you meet Chris Jacob? He's vice president of the American Firearms Retailers Association. He's the owner of the Bullseye Indoor Shooting Range and Gun Store in San Rafael, California. Chris, it's great to have you here. First of all, how is business under President Obama? Because everything I read says gun sales have been going up. Every time he talks about guns, gun sales go up.
It's been busy. And certainly I think that shows, as Taya said earlier, that there's a very serious concern in this country about personal security. And the sheriff is right. They do everything they possibly can to make sure they get there as quickly as they possibly can. And my question is actually focused around law enforcement as well. There's 53,000 licensed gun dealers in the United States who stand behind the counter and say no to people all day.
Yep.
We feel it's our responsibility to make sure that people who have a criminal past, people who are mentally ill or are having a bad day don't get possession of firearms. So we assist law enforcement all the time in the process of making sure that those things don't change hands inside our commercial market if they shouldn't. It's a very serious responsibility for us, and as a group, we take it very seriously. My question is around the executive order related to the investigators, the inspectors, the adding of 200 inspectors who are more on the auditing and record-keeping side. Why not add 200 ATF agents on the law enforcement side to keep the criminals and the bad guys out of the stores in the first place? I mean, the problem seems to me to be, you mentioned dealers who are less responsible than others, and certainly it's possible that those folks are out there. But if we can enforce the laws that already exist, the tens of thousands of gun laws that are on the books right now, it might create a very significant deterrent
And Chris,
that getting those people in the
let me
stores.
also point out the number of ATF agents during your administration has actually declined. So even if you hired 200,
Yes, not
200
not
more,
because of my budget.
but even if you
but
hired
because
200
of-
more, it'll get it to what it was right before you
Absolutely.
took office.
Well, look, first of all, there are a whole bunch of responsible gun dealers out there. And my hope would be that those gun dealers would support making sure that everybody's following the same rules that they are. That's number one. Number two is we're not writing a new law. Only Congress can do that. This is about enforcing existing laws and closing what has grown into a massive loophole where a huge percentage of guns, many of whom end up being traced to crime, are not going through the responsible gun dealers, but are going through irresponsible folks who are not registered as doing business. And the whole goal here is to clarify and to put on notice that if you're a business, even if you don't have bricks and mortar, then you're supposed to register and you're supposed to conduct background checks. So the issue is not where you do it, it's what you're doing. And that should not be something that threatens responsible gun dealers across the country. In terms of the ATF, it is absolutely true that the ATF budget has been shrunk. It's a little late, but you knew what I meant. And part of it is because the politicizing of this issue. So many in the Republican Congress feel as if the ATF is not their friend but their enemy. Part of the story I was
this issue
telling.
should be politicized, though.
Well, but what I mean by that, Anderson, is that they have been portrayed as trying to take people's guns away, as opposed to trying to make sure that the laws are enforced. And one of the most frustrating things that I hear is when people say, who are opposed to any further laws, why don't you just enforce the laws that are on the books? And those very same members of Congress then cut ATF budgets to make it impossible to enforce the law. And so it is, and by the way, the ATF is a law enforcement agency working under the FBI that is doing enormous work in going after criminals and drug cartels and have a pretty dangerous job. So it's not as if doing background checks or auditing gun sales is all that they're doing. Part of my proposal is also developing better technologies so that we can do tracing of shells when a crime is committed in order to figure out who exactly are the perpetrators of the crime and where did they obtain the weapon. So there's a whole bunch of other elements to this that are going to be important. But my hope is that responsible gun dealers like yourself and your organization are going to be supportive of this proposal, because it should actually help push away unscrupulous dealers, and that means more customers for you guys.
I want to bring in Mark Kelly, as you know, former astronaut, husband of former Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, who we're proud to say is here tonight. 5 years ago this week in Tucson, Arizona, Congresswoman Giffords was shot. 6 others were killed. Captain, your question?
Well, thank you for being here, Mr. President. As you know, Gabby and I are both gun owners. We take gun ownership very seriously and, really think about the voices of responsible gun owners in this debate. But I want to follow up to something Father Pfleger said and your answer to his question. And it's about expanded background checks. Often what you hear in the debate of expanding background checks to more gun sales, and as you know, Gabby and I are 100% behind the concept of somebody getting a background check before buying a gun. But when we testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, we heard not only from the gun lobby, but from United States senators that expanding background checks will, not may, will lead to a registry, which will lead to confiscation, which will lead to a tyrannical government. So I would like you to explain, with 350 million guns in 65 million places, households, from Key West to Alaska, 350 million objects in 65 million places. If the federal government wanted to confiscate those objects, how would they do that?
Well, look, first of all, every time I see Gabby, I'm just so thrilled because I visited her in the hospital. And as I mentioned, I think, in the speech in the White House, as we left the hospital then to go to a memorial service, we got word that Gabby had opened her eyes for the first time. And we did not think that she was going to be here, and she is. And Mark's just been extraordinary. And by the way, Mark's twin brother's up in space right now and is breaking the record for the longest continuous orbiting of the planet, which is pretty impressive stuff. What I think Mark is alluding to is what I said earlier, this notion of a conspiracy out there, and it gets wrapped up in concerns about the federal government. Now, there's a long history of that. That's in our DNA. You know, the United States was born suspicious of some distant authority.
But let me just jump in. Is it fair to call it a conspiracy? I mean,
well, yeah.
There's a lot of people who really believe this deeply, that they just don't.
No.
They just don't trust you.
I'm sorry, Cooper. Yes, it is fair to call it a conspiracy. What are you saying? Are you suggesting that the notion that we are creating a plot to take everybody's guns away so that we can impose martial law
but there's certainly
is
a lot of
a
people,
conspiracy? Yes, that is a conspiracy. I would hope that you would agree with that. Is that controversial? Except on some websites around the country?
There are certainly a lot of people who just have a fundamental distrust that you do not want to go further and further and further down this road.
Look, I mean, I'm only going to be here for another year. I don't know. When would I have started on this enterprise, right? I come from the state of Illinois, which we've been talking about Chicago, but downstate Illinois is closer to Kentucky than it is to Chicago. And everybody hunts down there. And a lot of folks own guns. And so this is not like alien territory to me. I've got a lot of friends like Mark who are hunters. I just came back from Alaska where I ate a moose that had just been shot. And it was pretty good. So yes, it is a false notion that I believe is circulated for either political reasons or commercial reasons in order to prevent a coming together among people of goodwill to develop common sense rules that will make us safer while preserving the Second Amendment. And the notion that we can't agree on some things while not agreeing on others. And the reason for that is because, well, the president secretly wants to do X. It would mean that we'd be paralyzed about doing everything. I mean, maybe when I propose to make sure that, you know, unsafe drugs are taken off the market, that secretly I'm trying to control the entire drug industry or take people's drugs away. But probably not. What's more likely is I just want to make sure that people are not dying by taking bad drugs.
You wrote an op-ed that just got published.
Yes.
A lot of people probably have not read it yet. One of the things you say in it is that you are not going to campaign for, vote for any candidate, regardless of what party they're in, if they do not support common sense gun reform.
Yeah, I meant what I said. And the reason I said that is this. The majority of people in this country